The lunchbox trembled in my hands as I forced myself to lift the lid. Inside, nothing looked unusual at first. Just rice, vegetables, and Benjamin's favorite grilled chicken. But the rim of the container sparkled faintly under the fluorescent office lights. Tiny white crystals clung to the edges like frost. Probably sugar, I muttered with a weak smile. But when David Brooks, my closest colleague, and once a respected doctor, touched the rim with his fingertip, his face went pale. He grabbed my wrist so tightly I nearly dropped the box. His whisper was desperate, trembling. "Margaret, take your son to the hospital, now. Don't ask me why. Just do it, or Benjamin will die." The office fell silent. My heart stopped beating. My only son, my everything. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. That moment was the crack in my world, the beginning of a revelation so dark it almost destroyed my family. Just one day earlier, life had seemed so normal. Washington, D.C. mornings in the Wallace home were always busy. Benjamin, sharp and ambitious at 32, dressed for his job as a financial executive, adjusting his tie with that boyish grin that still reminded me of the child I had raised alone after his father passed. Clara, his wife, bustled in the kitchen with practiced grace, her long dark hair pulled back, laughter spilling from her phone conversations as she prepared lunch for us both. She always insisted, "Mom, eating out isn't safe. I'll take care of everything." To me, she was the daughter I never had. Beautiful, lively, thoughtful, or so I believed. I'd been living with them for almost 8 months now. After selling my house in Alexandria to help them with the down payment on their Georgetown brownstone, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. I would save on rent while looking for a smaller place, and they'd have help with their mortgage. Benjamin had protested at first. He'd always been fiercely independent, but Clara had insisted. "Family should stick together," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "Besides, Margaret, you've been alone too long." On that rushed Monday morning, in the shuffle of bags and containers, she handed me the wrong lunch. "Here's yours, Mom," she'd said, sliding the blue container into my tote. I noticed nothing unusual. Just another day, another packed lunch from my thoughtful daughter-in-law. I remember how she'd touched Benjamin's face before he left. "You work too hard," she'd whispered. "You look tired." He did look tired. Had been looking tired for weeks. But we both attributed it to the stress of his recent promotion, the new responsibilities, the longer hours. "I'm fine," he'd said, kissing her goodbye. "Just need more coffee." The truth was so much darker. Now, standing in my office at the Department of Education, I stared at David, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. "What's wrong with the food?" David glanced around the break room, then pulled me into the empty conference room next door. His eyes, usually calm and analytical, were wild with fear. "That's not sugar, Margaret. I'm almost certain it's arsenic." "Arsenic?" I nearly laughed. It sounded absurd, like something from an old detective novel. Why would there be arsenic in Benjamin's lunch? "I don't know." David's voice dropped to a whisper, but I recognize it from my medical days. The crystalline structure, the way it clings to surfaces. Look, I could be wrong, but if I'm right and Benjamin's been eating this— The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the conference table to steady myself. "Call him," David urged. "Tell him not to eat whatever lunch he has. Get him to the hospital for testing. They can check his system for arsenic buildup." My hands shook so badly I could barely operate my phone. Benjamin didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. I called his office. "Mr. Wallace stepped out for lunch," his assistant informed me. My stomach dropped. "Do you know where he went?" "It's an emergency." "I believe he mentioned eating at his desk today. He brought lunch from home." The room spun faster. I ended the call and dialed Benjamin again, praying he would answer. On the 4th ring, he picked up. "Mom, what's wrong?" His voice, alive, normal, nearly brought me to my knees with relief. "Benjamin, don't eat your lunch. Please tell me you haven't eaten it yet." I was just about to. "Why? What's going on?" "Just don't. I'll explain later. I need you to meet me at Georgetown University Hospital. Right away." "Hospital? Mom, you're scaring me. Are you okay?" I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "It's not me. Please, just trust me. I'm on my way there now." After hanging up, I turned to David, who had already packed the lunch container in a plastic bag. "We need to get this tested," he said. "I have a friend at the toxicology lab who can rush it through." As we hurried to the parking garage, my mind raced through possibilities. A mistake, contamination, an accident. But David's grim expression suggested he was thinking what I couldn't bear to consider. Someone had deliberately put poison in my son's food, and if Clara had packed it, no, it wasn't possible. Clara adored Benjamin. Everyone commented on what a perfect couple they made, how she doted on him, how lucky he was. Yet doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Benjamin had been getting sick frequently these past months. Nothing severe: fatigue, stomach cramps, headaches. We'd attributed it to stress, to his long hours, to Washington's polluted summer air. What if it had been something else entirely? In the car, speeding toward the hospital, I finally asked the question burning through my mind. David, if someone was being poisoned slowly, with arsenic, what would the symptoms be? David kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Fatigue, digestive issues, headaches, hair loss. Nothing too specific at first. Could be mistaken for stress. Or a virus. Each symptom he listed felt like a knife in my heart. Benjamin had complained of every single one. My God, I whispered, staring out at the familiar Washington monuments passing in a blur. My God, what has she done? Georgetown University Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos typical of a weekday afternoon. I paced the emergency room waiting area, jumping every time the automatic doors slid open. David had gone to meet his contact at the toxicology lab, taking the suspicious lunch with him. When Benjamin finally arrived, his face was drawn with worry. Mom, what's going on? Why am I here? I pulled him into a fierce hug, breathing in his familiar scent, reassuring myself he was still here, still alive. How could I tell him? How could I put into words the horror that was forming in my mind? Honey, I need you to be tested for poison. The words felt unreal on my tongue. He pulled back, confusion clouding his face. Poison? What are you talking about? I led him to a quiet corner of the waiting room. This morning, Clara accidentally gave me your lunch instead of mine. David, you remember David from work, the former doctor? He noticed something strange about it. Something that looked like I couldn't say it. He thinks someone might be poisoning your food. Benjamin stared at me, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. Mom, that's crazy. Who would poison me? And why? I don't know. I lied. The suspicion was there, but I couldn't voice it. Not yet. Not until I was certain. But you haven't been feeling well lately, have you? The fatigue. The stomach problems. His smile faded. That's just stress. Maybe. But I need you to get tested. Please, Benjamin. For me. Something in my expression must have convinced him. He nodded slowly, the worry lines deepening around his eyes. Okay, but you're overreacting. There's an explanation for this that doesn't involve some ridiculous murder plot. I prayed he was right. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical forms, blood draws, and anxious waiting. I called Benjamin's office to let them know he wouldn't be returning that afternoon. I called my own supervisor too, mumbling something about a family emergency. I did not call Clara. David returned with grim confirmation. The lab found significant traces of arsenic in the food, he reported, his voice low. Not a lethal amount in a single dose, but enough to cause serious damage over time. Benjamin sat very still, the color draining from his face. That's impossible. I'm sorry, David said. The test is conclusive. The doctor who examined Benjamin ordered more comprehensive testing. We'll check for arsenic buildup in your hair and nails, she explained. That will tell us if this has been ongoing. Benjamin nodded mechanically, shock setting in. I don't understand, he kept saying. I don't understand. While they ran the tests, I stepped outside to make a call, not to Clara, but to James Harrison, my attorney. James had handled my late husband's estate and had become a trusted friend over the years. Margaret, what a surprise, he answered warmly. James, I need your help with something. Sensitive. I struggled to keep my voice steady. It's about Benjamin and Clara. Something in my tone must have alerted him. What's happened? I told him everything. The lunch mix-up, David's suspicion, the lab results. James, I know how this sounds, but I need to know if Clara has any financial motivation, if something were to happen to Benjamin. A long pause followed. When James spoke, again, his voice was careful, Benjamin updated his will after they married. Everything goes to Clara, with some provisions for you. And my will? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd updated it after moving in with them, naming Benjamin as my sole beneficiary. If Benjamin died before me, Clara would inherit almost everything, James confirmed. The house in Alexandria was sold, but you still have your investment portfolio, the life insurance policy, and your perfume business is quite valuable. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Clara had come from nothing. She'd told us that much. A small town in Nevada, parents deceased, no siblings. She'd worked her way through community college before landing a job at the marketing firm where she met Benjamin. She'd seemed so grateful for our family, so eager to belong. Had it all been an act? When I returned to Benjamin's room, the doctor was reviewing his test results. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "Mr. Wallace, your hair and nail samples show elevated levels of arsenic. These levels indicate exposure over a period of months, not days." Benjamin sat on the edge of the hospital bed, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Are you saying someone's been poisoning me, deliberately?" "I can't speak to intent," she replied carefully. "But these levels aren't consistent with environmental exposure. We'll need to report this to the police." The detective arrived an hour later. A woman named Olivia Chen with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She interviewed us separately, taking detailed notes about our household routines, about who prepared meals, about Benjamin's symptoms. "Your wife makes all your meals?" she asked Benjamin. "Most of them," he admitted. "She's particular about food. Says restaurant food is full of chemicals." Detective Chen's pen paused briefly. "And does she eat the same meals she prepares for you?" "Not usually. She has dietary restrictions. She's vegan." Another note. "Mr. Wallace, I have to ask, is there anyone who might benefit from your death, financially or otherwise?" Benjamin looked up, his expression hardening. "If you're suggesting my wife is trying to kill me, you're wrong. Clara loves me." Detective Chen's face remained impassive. "I need to ask these questions." "Well, find another suspect," he snapped. "Clara would never hurt me." When the detective left his room, she pulled me aside in the hallway. "Mrs. Wallace, I understand this is difficult, but we need to proceed carefully. If your daughter-in-law is behind this, confronting her directly could be dangerous." I nodded, numb with shock and grief. "What do? We gather evidence, and we keep your son safe." Her eyes softened slightly. "For now, he should stay somewhere else." "Somewhere she wouldn't expect." "He can stay with me at a hotel," I said. "Good. And Mrs. Wallace?" She handed me her card. "Don't go home tonight either. Don't let her know what we've discovered." As I returned to Benjamin's room, my phone lit up with a text from Clara. "Is everything okay? Benjamin's assistant said there was an emergency. Call me." I stared at the message, at the concerned words, from the woman I'd welcomed into my family, the woman who had called me mom, who had held my hand at family gatherings, who had promised to make my son happy, the woman who, I now believed, had been trying to kill him. I put the phone away without responding. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, but it was safe. Benjamin sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall-mounted television that neither of us had bothered to turn on. His phone buzzed for what must have been the 20th time that evening. "She's worried," he said, his voice flat. "She doesn't know where I am." I closed the curtains against the Washington skyline, suddenly paranoid about being watched. "You can't tell her anything, Benjamin. Not yet. This is insane." He ran his hands through his hair, thinner than it had been 6 months ago, I realized with a chill. "We're hiding in a hotel because my wife supposedly tried to poison me? Do you hear how that sounds?" I sat beside him, taking his cold hands in mine. "I know how it sounds, but the tests don't lie. There was arsenic in your food. There is arsenic in your system. But Clara," his voice broke. "She's my wife, Mom. We've been married for 3 years." "I know, honey." The pain in his eyes was unbearable. I'd watched Benjamin grow from a sensitive boy to a determined young man, had celebrated every achievement, had comforted every heartbreak. But this, watching him confront the possibility that the woman he loved wanted him dead, this was beyond anything a mother should have to witness. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered it, putting it on speaker. "Benjamin?" Clara's voice was high with panic. "Where are you? What's happening? I've been calling for hours." He glanced at me, conflict written across his face. I shook my head in warning. "I'm okay," he said carefully. "There was a situation at work. I'm staying late to fix it." "Your assistant said you left for a family emergency," she pressed. "I called your mother, but she's not answering either. Is she with you? Is she okay?" The concern in her voice sounded so genuine. For a moment, I doubted everything. Could we be wrong? Could there be another explanation? "Mom's fine," Benjamin replied. She's helping me with the work situation. We'll probably be very late. Don't wait up. A pause. That doesn't make sense, Ben. What work emergency? Involves your mother? What's really going on? I watched my son struggle with the lie. Benjamin had always been honest to a fault. I'll explain everything tomorrow, he said finally. I have to go now. After hanging up, he buried his face in his hands. She knows something's wrong. Let her wonder, I said more sharply than I intended. The fear was hardening into anger inside me. Benjamin, we need to think about this logically. The police are investigating, but we need our own answers. What answers? He looked up, eyes red. The only thing that makes sense is that it's all a mistake. Some contamination in the food. Something Clara didn't know about. I took a deep breath. Tomorrow I'm going to meet with James Harrison. There are financial angles we need to explore. Financial angles, he repeated dully. You think my wife is poisoning me for money? I don't know, I admitted. But we need to consider every possibility. Sleep eluded us both that night. I lay awake listening to Benjamin's restless movements in the adjacent bed, wondering how our lives had shattered so completely in a single day. By morning, missed calls and messages from Clara had filled both our phones. We silenced them and headed to James Harrison's office in downtown D.C. James was waiting with a folder of documents and a grim expression. I've been reviewing the financial situation, he said after we settled in his book-lined office. It's concerning. He laid out papers on his mahogany desk. Benjamin, your life insurance policy was increased 6 months ago. The beneficiary is Clara exclusively. That was her idea, Benjamin said slowly. She said we needed better coverage, more security. Around the same time, James continued, she convinced you to consolidate your accounts, correct? Joint ownership of everything? Benjamin nodded, the color draining from his face. And Margaret, when was it that you moved in with them? 8 months ago, I said. After selling my house. James nodded, making a note. And the proceeds from that sale went where? Most of it went toward their mortgage, I admitted. Clara suggested it, said it was better than me paying rent somewhere else. The attorney leaned back in his chair. So, within the span of a few months, Clara gained potential access to your assets, Margaret, through Benjamin. She increased his life insurance, and she ensured that all your funds would eventually come to her if Benjamin died before you. Put so bluntly, it sounded damning, but it still didn't make sense to me. Clara already had a good life with Benjamin. Why risk everything for money that might never come? James hesitated. There's something else. I took the liberty of running a background check on Clara this morning. He slid another document across the desk. Clara Wallace, née Sanderson. Except, there is no Clara Sanderson from Elko, Nevada with her birth date. The social security number she uses belongs to a Clara Sanderson who died in infancy 30 years ago. Benjamin's head snapped up. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife isn't who she claims to be, James said gently. And this isn't the first time she's done this. The final document was a newspaper clipping. A grainy photo showed a younger version of Clara, hair dyed blonde but unmistakably her, standing beside an older man. The headline read, Local businessman dies after long illness, leaves fortune to young widow. Robert Kincaid, age 68, of Portland, Oregon, James read. Married to Sarah Kincaid for 14 months before his mysterious decline and death. By the time family members raised suspicions, Sarah had disappeared with nearly $2 million. Benjamin made a choked sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. This is a mistake. That's not Clara. The police are verifying her fingerprints, James said, but facial recognition is fairly conclusive. I watched my son's world collapse in real time. The disbelief in his eyes gave way to horror, then a grief so profound I could barely stand to witness it. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward, and walked to the window overlooking the city. Ben, I said softly, I'm so sorry. 3 years, he whispered, his back to us. 3 years of my life with someone who doesn't exist. He pressed his forehead against the glass. How could I not have known? James, and I exchanged glances. The police want to move carefully, James explained. They're building a case, but they need more evidence. Detective Chen suggested setting up surveillance in your home. Benjamin turned, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Do it. Whatever they need. They'll need your consent to install cameras, James said. And they want to set a trap. What kind of trap? I asked. They want to catch her in the act, James replied, which means Benjamin would have to go home and pretend nothing's wrong. No, I said immediately. It's too dangerous. I'll do it, Benjamin said, his voice steely. I want to see her face when she does it. I need to know for sure. Benjamin, she could kill you, I protested. They'll be monitoring everything, James assured us. And they'll provide Benjamin with activated charcoal tablets to take secretly before meals. It won't prevent all absorption, but it will limit the damage from a single dose. I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. This is my son's life we're gambling with. It's my decision, Benjamin said quietly, and I've made it. That afternoon, we met with Detective Chen at the police station. Her team had worked quickly, gathering what evidence they could. She showed us photos of Clara, or whatever her real name was, from various cities, always with a different hair color, always with a wealthy older man. We believe she's done this at least 3 times before, Detective Chen explained. Robert Kincaid in Portland, Thomas Greaves in Chicago, William Foster in Phoenix, all older. Men who died after mysterious illnesses, all leaving everything to their young wives, who vanished shortly after. But Benjamin doesn't fit the pattern, I said. He's young, healthy. That's what makes this different, she agreed. Our theory is that she's evolved her method. By marrying someone your age, Benjamin, she gains access to not just your assets, but potentially your mother's as well. 2 targets, 1 cover story. Benjamin stared at the photos, studying the woman he thought he knew. How soon can we do this? We can have the equipment installed tomorrow while she's at work, Detective Chen said. Small cameras in the kitchen, dining room, your bedroom, audio throughout the house. And then? I asked. Then Benjamin goes home, acts normal, and waits. Her eyes were sympathetic but firm. It could take days. She might be more cautious now that you've been away unexpectedly. I'll handle it, Benjamin said. The shock had given way to a cold determination that worried me almost as much as Clara's deception. My gentle, trusting son was gone. In his place stood a stranger with haunted eyes and a clenched jaw. Ben, I said softly, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Mom. He met my gaze, and I saw not just anger, but a deep, aching sense of betrayal. I need to see it for myself. I need to know it wasn't all a lie. But we both knew it was. Every smile, every kiss, every whispered, I love you. All calculated steps in Clara's patient march toward murder. The cameras were installed with military precision, tiny lenses hidden in light fixtures, air, vents, even the decorative clock in the kitchen. Clara's domain, where she prepared the meals she never shared. Detective Chen's team worked efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence. Benjamin returned home that evening with a carefully rehearsed story about a work emergency, about my helping him with a presentation, about both of us turning off our phones during an all-night strategy session. I watched through a secure feed in a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, my heart in my throat as Clara greeted him at the door. Ben, thank God! She threw her arms around him, her face a perfect mask of relief and love. I was so worried. Why didn't you call? Benjamin hugged her back, and if I hadn't known better, I would have thought nothing was wrong. My son, it seemed, was a better actor than I'd given him credit for. I'm sorry, he said, following her inside. It was chaos. The Henderson account nearly fell through. Mom helped me pull together a new proposal. You could have sent a text, she chided, touching his face in that familiar, tender way that now made my skin crawl. I called hospitals, Ben. I thought something terrible had happened. Something terrible had happened, I thought bitterly. She just didn't know we'd discovered it. I'm sorry, Benjamin repeated. I should have called. Clara led him to the kitchen, where something aromatic simmered on the stove. You must be exhausted. Sit down. I'll get you some dinner. I tensed, watching as she ladled soup into a bowl. Benjamin had taken the activated charcoal tablets before entering the house. They would help, but not completely. Every bite he took was still a risk. Aren't you eating? Benjamin asked as she set only 1 bowl on the table. I ate earlier, she said with a smile. Couldn't wait. Besides, you know I can't eat this. There's chicken broth in it. Detective Chen, sitting beside me in the van, made a note. Always the same pattern. She never eats what she serves him. The next. 3 days passed in excruciating slowness. I stayed at the hotel, maintaining the fiction that I was apartment hunting. Benjamin went to work, came home, ate Clara's meals, and secretly collected samples for the police to test. Each one showed traces of arsenic, not enough to kill immediately, but enough to slowly weaken him, to make him susceptible to the heart attack or stroke that would eventually be his official cause of death. We watched Clara with the fascination of scientists observing a particularly deadly specimen. She was meticulous, Careful. The poison went into Benjamin's food in tiny amounts, always when she thought no one was watching. A sprinkle in his coffee, a dusting over his portion of pasta. Once, most chillingly, mixed into the sugar she stirred into his tea, while smiling at him across the kitchen island. She's good, Detective Chen admitted grudgingly. If we hadn't been looking for it specifically, we'd never have caught it. On the fourth day, they decided they had enough evidence. The plan was to arrest Clara the next morning when Benjamin had left for work. Clean, simple, minimal risk. But then Benjamin called me, his voice tight with controlled panic. Mom, I need you to come over for dinner tonight. Clara's insisting. What? Why? She says she has news to share with both of us. Something important. I glanced at Detective Chen, who was already shaking her head. Tell him no, she said firmly. It's too dangerous. But Benjamin's next words froze my blood. She's making your favorite, Mom. Beef Wellington. She's been preparing it all day. The implication was clear. Clara had never cooked for me before. Why start now, unless... She knows, I whispered, covering the phone. Somehow she knows we're on to her. Detective Chen grabbed the phone. Benjamin, listen to me. Do not eat anything she prepares tonight. Make an excuse, say you're sick, anything. If I do that, she'll run, he replied calmly. You said, yourself? She's done this before. She's prepared to disappear at the first sign of trouble. Let her run, I pleaded. The police can catch her. Not if she has new identities ready, Detective Chen pointed out. Not if she has escape routes planned. Benjamin's voice hardened. I'm not letting her get away with this. I'm not letting her do this to someone else. After a tense discussion, a new plan formed. I would come to dinner. We would both pretend to eat, secretly disposing of the food when possible. The police would be ready to move in at the first sign of danger. It was risky, but it might be our only chance to catch Clara before she vanished. That evening, I rang the doorbell of the brownstone I'd once considered home, my hands trembling despite my resolve to appear normal. Clara opened the door, radiant in a blue dress I'd given her for Christmas. Mom! She embraced me warmly. I'm so glad you could come. Ben's just opening some wine. The house smelled delicious. The rich aroma of beef and pastry, of caramelized vegetables and expensive wine. Clara had outdone herself, preparing a meal fit for a celebration, or a final goodbye. Benjamin greeted me with a hug, whispering, in my ear, be careful. We gathered in the dining room, where Clara had set the table with our best china and crystal, wedding gifts I'd kept in storage until they'd bought this house. Everything looked perfect, normal, the scene of a happy family dinner. Except for the invisible cameras recording every moment, except for the police officers waiting outside, except for the poison that might be, waiting in our food. Clara served the Wellington with flourish, cutting thick slices of the pastry-wrapped beef. I've been practicing this recipe for weeks, she said proudly. I wanted it to be perfect for tonight. What's the occasion? I asked, forcing a smile as she placed a plate before me. Clara glanced at Benjamin, her eyes sparkling. Should I tell her, or do you want to? Benjamin looked momentarily confused, then recovered. Go ahead. It's your news. Clara reached across the table to take my hand. We're pregnant, Mom. You're going to be a grandmother. The fork I'd just picked up clattered against the china. Pregnant? I repeated numbly. She nodded, eyes brimming with what looked like genuine tears. 8 weeks. We wanted to be sure before we told you. I stared at Benjamin, who looked as stunned as I felt. This couldn't be true. It had to be another manipulation, another lie. That's wonderful. I managed, feeling sick. If she was lying, it was cruel beyond measure. If she was telling the truth, God, it was even worse. Clara raised her glass of water. To family, she toasted. The one we have, and the one we're building. I lifted my wine glass. Automatically, my mind racing. Was the pregnancy why she'd accelerated her plan? Did she want Benjamin gone before the baby came, leaving her with everything? Aren't you going to try it? Clara asked, nodding at my untouched Wellington. After all that work? I cut a small piece, bringing it to my lips, but not quite taking it in. It looks amazing. Benjamin had already managed to slip most of his portion into his napkin when Clara looked away. Now he pretended to chew, reaching for his wine to wash it down. Clara watched us both with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was that suspicion in her eyes? Or was I imagining it? Is something wrong with the food? She asked lightly. Neither of you seems very hungry. Just taking my time to savor it, I said, cutting another small piece. She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. You know, I've been thinking about names for the baby. If it's a boy, maybe Robert, or Thomas, or William. What do you think, Ben? My blood ran cold. Those weren't random names. They were the names of her previous husbands, the ones who had died mysteriously. She knew. She was toying with us. Benjamin set down his fork carefully. Clara, don't, she interrupted, her voice suddenly hard. Don't say another word. The mask had finally slipped. The woman sitting across from us was a stranger, her eyes cold and calculating. How long have you known? She asked softly. The dining room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Clara's question hung in the air between us, sharp as a blade. Known. What? Benjamin asked, his voice impressively steady. A bitter smile twisted Clara's lips. Please. The hospital visit. The missed calls. The way you've both been avoiding me. The way you're not eating. She gestured to our nearly full plates. You know. I glanced at Benjamin. A silent question passing between us. How much should we admit? Where were the police? Shouldn't they be moving in now? Clara laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. Oh, don't worry about signaling each other. I already found the cameras. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a tiny black object, one of the surveillance devices. Amateur work, really. Did you think I wouldn't check? I've been doing this a lot longer than you've been investigating me. My heart hammered against my ribs. If she'd found the cameras, the police wouldn't be watching. They wouldn't know we needed help. There's no baby, is there? Benjamin asked quietly. Clara tilted her head, studying him. Does it matter? Would you stay if there was? Why, Clara? The pain in my son's voice was unbearable. We had a good life. I loved you. Why would you do this? Money, of course. She said it matter-of-factly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. It's always money. But we're not rich, I protested. Not like the others. Her eyes flicked to me. No, but between Benjamin's insurance, your business, and this house, there's close to $3 million. Not my biggest score, but respectable. The casual way she discussed murdering us for profit made my skin crawl. I reached slowly for my purse, where I'd hidden my phone. If I could just text Detective Chen. Don't, Clara warned, and suddenly there was a small pistol in her hand, pointed directly at me. Hands on the table, Margaret. I froze, placing my hands carefully on either side of my plate. Benjamin tensed beside me, and I silently willed him not to do anything reckless. You won't get away with this, he said, his voice tight. The police already know everything. Clara smiled coldly. Do they? They know I've been poisoning you, yes. But they have no idea about the gun, or about my contingency plans. She stood, keeping the weapon trained on me while addressing Benjamin. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write a suicide note, Benjamin. You're going to confess that you've been embezzling from your firm. I've already planted the evidence for them to find, and that you can't live with the shame. Then you're going to shoot your mother, and then yourself. That's insane, Benjamin snapped. I would never. Oh, but you will, Clara cut in smoothly. Because if you don't, I'll shoot her myself, and it will be much, much slower. Her smile widened. I've always wondered what arsenic and a bullet wound would do together. Shall we find out? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The police will know it wasn't suicide. Will they? 2 shots from the same gun. Gunpowder residue on Benjamin's hand. A detailed suicide note in his handwriting. And me, the devastated widow, out with friends all evening. Which, by the way, is where I'm headed after this. To establish my alibi. She was, confident, I realized. Too confident. There was something we were missing. Now, Clara continued, get up slowly. We're going to Benjamin's study, where he keeps his very legal, very registered handgun in the desk drawer. How convenient. As we stood, I noticed Benjamin's hand trembling slightly. Not with fear, I realized, but with rage. I'd never seen that expression on my son's face. A cold fury. That transformed his features into something hard and unrecognizable. You know what I don't understand, he said, his voice eerily calm as Clara herded us toward the study. How you kept it hidden for so long. How you played the loving wife so convincingly. Clara laughed. It wasn't hard. Men are so desperate to be loved, they'll believe anything. Even when their hair is falling out and they can barely get out of bed in the morning, they'll still convince themselves their wife adores them. And what about me? I asked, playing for time as we moved slowly through the hallway. Why include me in your plan? Opportunity, she shrugged. When I realized Benjamin was named in your will, it was too perfect to pass up. 2 for the price of 1. Besides, you made it so easy, Margaret. So eager. For a daughter, so willing to sell your house and move in with us. We reached the study, a handsome room lined with bookshelves. Benjamin's desk sat near the window overlooking the back garden. Open the drawer, Clara ordered, gesturing to Benjamin with the gun. Slowly. Benjamin hesitated, then moved toward the desk. I frantically tried to think of a way out. Some distraction. Some weakness we could exploit. But Clara kept her distance, the gun steady in her hand, her eyes alert and watchful. This wasn't her first time holding someone at gunpoint, I realized with a chill. As Benjamin pulled open the drawer, a sharp knock came at the front door. All 3 of us froze. "Ignore it!" Clara hissed. The knocking came again, more insistent. Then a voice called out, "Police! Open up!" Clara's expression flickered with surprise, then hardened into determination. "They can't get in without a warrant. We have time." She moved closer to Benjamin, pressing the gun to his temple. "Get the gun from the drawer. Now." Benjamin slowly reached into the drawer, but instead of pulling out a gun, his hand emerged empty. "It's not here." "What?" Clara snapped, momentarily glancing down at the open drawer. In that split second of distraction, Benjamin moved. He grabbed her wrist, twisting the gun away from his head as they grappled. I lunged forward, trying to help, but Clara was surprisingly strong, fighting with the desperation of someone who knew what capture would mean. The gun went off with a deafening crack. For one terrible moment, I couldn't tell who had been hit. They were both still standing, frozen in a macabre tableau. Then Benjamin stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, dark red blooming through his white shirt. Clara's face transformed into a mask of cold calculation. She raised the gun again, this time pointing it directly at my heart. "Goodbye, Margaret," she said calmly. The window behind her exploded inward in a shower of glass as a dark figure crashed through. Detective Chen tackled Clara from behind, driving her to the floor as the gun skittered across the hardwood. More officers poured in through the front door, their shouts filling the house. I rushed to Benjamin, who had slumped against the desk, his face pale with shock and pain. "Hold on, sweetheart," I pleaded, pressing my hands against his wound. "Help is coming." He managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, Mom. It's just my shoulder." Across the room, Clara was being handcuffed, her face contorted with rage as Detective Chen recited her rights. Our eyes met briefly, and the hatred in her gaze made me flinch. "You were supposed to be dead already," she spat. "Both of you. You should have eaten that food months ago." As paramedics rushed in to tend to Benjamin, Detective Chen approached me. "We lost the video feed an hour ago," she explained. "When we couldn't re-establish contact, we moved in. I'm sorry we cut it so close." I nodded numbly, watching as they led Clara away. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, who'd called me Mom, who'd sat at my table and planned my death over dinner, glared back at me with such venom that I felt physically ill. She had aliases and plane tickets in her closet, Detective Chen added, ready to leave the country tonight, if we hadn't moved when we did. She didn't need to finish the thought. Clara, or whatever her real name was, had been prepared to kill us both and disappear before the bodies were cold. As Benjamin was loaded onto a stretcher, I held his hand tightly, tears of relief and lingering fear streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I should have seen through her." "None of us saw it," he replied weakly. "She was too good." Later at the hospital, as doctors removed the bullet from Benjamin's shoulder, Detective Chen showed me what they'd found in Clara's personal laptop. Multiple identities, bank accounts in different names, research on poisons, and most chillingly, a document detailing our habits, our schedules, our medical histories, all the information she'd gathered while living among us, planning our deaths. "She's done this before," Detective Chen confirmed. "We've linked her to at least 3 other deaths, all wealthy men who died of natural causes, all with their money missing afterward." "Will she go to prison?" I asked. "With the evidence we have now? Absolutely. The attempted murder charge alone carries 20 years. Once we connect her to the other deaths, she'll never see freedom again." It should have been comforting, but all I felt was a profound emptiness. No punishment could undo the damage Clara had inflicted, not just the physical harm to Benjamin, but the deeper wounds of betrayal and broken trust. As I sat by my son's hospital bed that night, watching him sleep, I wondered if either of us would ever be the same again. Spring arrived in Washington 6 months after Clara's arrest, bringing cherry blossoms to the tidal basin, and a tentative sense of renewal to our shattered lives. Benjamin's shoulder had healed, leaving a puckered scar that he refused to hide. "It's a reminder," he told me once, "of how blind I can be." We'd moved out of the Georgetown brownstone. Neither of us could stand to live in those rooms anymore, with their memories of poisoned meals and whispered lies. Benjamin found an apartment in DuPont Circle, while I used what remained of my savings to rent a small place in Alexandria, close to where my old house had stood. The trial was set for summer. Clara, whose real name we learned was Elise Chambers, had pled not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence against her. Her lawyer had attempted to portray her as a victim of abuse, claiming she'd poisoned Benjamin in self-defense after years of mistreatment. The strategy had failed spectacularly when prosecutors produced her detailed journals, meticulously documenting her plans and previous murders. On this particular Saturday, I was meeting Benjamin for lunch at a cafe we'd both come to favor. Its outdoor seating and open kitchen, where we could watch our food being prepared, offered a sense of security we both still craved. "Mom," Benjamin called, waving from a corner table. He looked better than he had in months. His color had returned, his hair was growing back thick and dark, and he'd regained the weight that had melted away during Clara's poisoning campaign. Only his eyes remained changed, the innocence in them replaced by a wariness that broke my heart. I hugged him tightly before sitting down. These physical reassurances had become our habit, as if we both needed to confirm the other was really there, really safe. "How are you doing?" I asked, studying his face. "Better," he replied with a small smile. "Dr. Mercer says I'm making good progress." The therapist had been Benjamin's lifeline through the darkest days after Clara's arrest. When the shock wore off, the full weight of the betrayal had nearly crushed him. How does one recover from learning that their spouse of 3 years had been systematically poisoning them? That every "I love you" had been a calculated lie? That the person who shared their bed had been planning their death and the nightmares? I asked gently. He shrugged. Less frequent. Still there. I nodded, understanding all too well. I had my own nightmares. Vivid dreams where I was too late. Where David hadn't noticed the arsenic. Where I found Benjamin dead in that house while Clara disappeared with our money. "I have news," Benjamin said after we'd ordered. "I've been offered a position in, Chicago. A fresh start." I felt a pang at the thought of him moving so far away, but I forced a smile. "That's wonderful, honey. When would you leave?" "August, after the trial." He hesitated. "I want you to come with me, Mom." I blinked in surprise. "To Chicago?" "I don't want to be that far from you," he admitted. "And honestly, I don't think either of us needs to be alone right now." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep inside me. My fiercely independent son, who had once been so determined to make his own way, was acknowledging that he needed his mother, and perhaps more importantly, that I needed him too. "I'd love that," I said softly. "But what about my business?" The perfume company I'd built from scratch had been struggling since Clara's arrest. The scandal had affected sales, and my distraction during the investigation hadn't helped matters. "You could sell it," Benjamin suggested, "or run it remotely, or start something new in Chicago." The idea of starting fresh, away from the whispers and pitying glances that followed us in Washington, held undeniable appeal. "I'll think about it," I promised. As our food arrived, the conversation shifted to more immediate concerns. "James called this morning," I said, referring to our attorney. "The prosecution wants us to meet with them again next week. They're preparing us for testimony." Benjamin nodded, his expression darkening. "Clara's lawyer requested another psychiatric evaluation. They're still pushing the mental illness defense." I squeezed his hand. "It won't work. Not with the evidence they have." We ate in companionable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. It struck me how much our relationship had deepened through this ordeal. Benjamin and I had always been close, but there was a new dimension to our bond now, forged in shared trauma, in the fight to protect each other, in the painful process of rebuilding our lives. "I went on a date last night," Benjamin said, suddenly. I looked up, surprised and hopeful. "Really? With whom?" "Sarah Lynn, from the accounting department." He pushed his food around his plate, not meeting my eyes. "It was nice." "Nice is good," I said carefully, trying not to show too much excitement. This was the first date he'd been on since Clara, the first step toward trusting again. "I told her everything," he continued. "About Clara, the poisoning, the trial. I wanted her to know what she was getting into." "How did she take it?" A small smile touched his lips. She said anyone who survived something like that and could still smile deserved a second date. I like her already, I said warmly. It's just a beginning, Benjamin cautioned. I don't know if I'll ever be able to, trust that way again. You will, I said with more confidence than I felt. Not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday. After lunch, we walked to the Lincoln Memorial. Something we'd done often when Benjamin was growing up. The familiar rhythm of our steps across the mall, the comforting presence of the towering monuments, reminded me of simpler times, when the greatest danger I feared for my son was a scraped knee or a broken heart. As we climbed the steps to the memorial, Benjamin asked the question I knew had been haunting him. Do you think she ever loved me at all? Even a little? I wanted to lie, to offer comfort, but we'd promised each other honesty after so many months of deception. No, I said gently. I don't think Clara, Elise, is capable of love. I think she sees people as means to an end. Nothing more. He nodded, accepting this harsh truth with the resilience that continued to amaze me. That's what I think too. It helps somehow, to know it wasn't personal. We stood before Lincoln's massive statue, dwarfed by its solemnity. Visitors moved around us, taking photos, reading inscriptions, unaware of the private drama we carried. I keep thinking about what might have happened, Benjamin I said quietly. If David hadn't noticed the arsenic that day, if you hadn't been given my lunch by mistake. Don't, I said firmly. We can't live in the what-ifs. But that's just it, Mom. He turned to me, his eyes intense. We are living. Despite everything she did, we're still here. We survived. The simple truth of it washed over me like a wave. We had survived. Not just physically, but emotionally. The woman who had infiltrated our family, who had tried to destroy us from within, had failed. Damaged as we were still standing. As we walked back along the reflecting pool, Benjamin voiced another thought that had clearly been weighing on him. I'm thinking of visiting her before the trial. I stopped walking. Clara? Why? I need to ask her something, just one thing. His expression was troubled. I need to know why she chose me specifically. Was it random? Or was there something about me that made her think I'd be an easy target? Benjamin, she'll only lie to you again, I warned. Whatever answer she gives, you can't trust it. Maybe, he shrugged. But right now, I'm filling that blank with my own worst thoughts. That I was weak, or stupid, or somehow deserved what happened. You didn't, I said fiercely. None of this was your fault. Logically, I know that. But emotionally, he trailed off, looking across the water. I need to face her one more time. On my terms, not hers. I wanted to argue, to protect him from any further pain Clara might inflict, but I recognized the determination in his stance. My son needed this closure, however. Risky it might be. I'll go with you, I offered. He smiled, squeezing my hand gratefully. I was hoping you would. As the afternoon light softened around us, casting long shadows across the National Mall, I felt a tentative hope stirring. We had a long road ahead. The trial, the move to Chicago, the continuing work of healing. But for the first time since that fateful day when David had recognized the arsenic in Benjamin's lunch, I believed we would truly recover. Not unchanged, never that, but perhaps stronger in the broken places, more appreciative of the genuine love we shared, more attuned to the preciousness of the life Clara had tried to steal from us. Let's go home, Benjamin said, and I nodded, knowing that home was no longer a place for us, but the safety we found in each other's presence. The Metropolitan Detention Center loomed against the gray April sky, a concrete monument to containment and consequence. Benjamin and I sat in the visitors' area, the sterile room with its hard plastic chairs and reinforced glass barriers so different from the warm, deceptive comfort of the home we'd once shared with Clara. Are you sure about this? I asked one final time. As we waited, Benjamin nodded, his posture rigid with tension. I need to see her face when I ask. I'll know if she's lying. I wasn't so certain. Clara, Elise, had fooled us both for years with her performances. But I understood my son's need for answers, for some fragment of truth to hold on to as we tried to rebuild our lives. A buzzer sounded, and a door at the far end of the room swung open. 2 guards escorted Clara in, her hands cuffed in front of her, her prison jumpsuit hanging loose on her frame. Her hair, once glossy and perfectly styled, was pulled back in a severe ponytail, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable. Without her designer clothes and carefully applied makeup, without the armor of her fabricated identity, she seemed almost ordinary, until she smiled. The expression transformed her face, bringing back the Clara we thought we'd known, the woman who'd charmed her way into our family, who'd called me Mom while plotting my death. The familiar sight sent ice through my veins. Benjamin, Margaret. She nodded to each of us as she sat down opposite the glass. What a lovely surprise. Family visit? The mockery in her tone made Benjamin's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. I have questions, he said simply. Clara leaned forward, her cuffed hands resting on the narrow counter. Of course you do. Everyone does. The prosecutors, the psychiatrists, the other women in here? She tilted her head, studying Benjamin with clinical interest. But you're the first husband who's come to ask them himself. The others. We're all too dead. I flinched at her casual cruelty, but Benjamin remained steady. Why me? He asked. Out of all the men you could have targeted, why did you choose me? Clara seemed to consider the question, perhaps weighing whether honesty or another performance would be more entertaining. Opportunity, she said finally. I met you at that fundraiser for Senator Mitchell. You were alone, successful, and, most importantly, you had that look. What look? Benjamin pressed. The look of someone who's desperate to believe in love. Her smile widened. Someone who would ignore red flags, who would rationalize away suspicions. Someone easy to manipulate. The assessment was brutal, but Benjamin absorbed it without flinching. And my mother? Was she part of your plan from the beginning? Not initially, Clara admitted. But when I realized how wealthy she was, how devoted to you, it seemed wasteful not to include her. She glanced at me with something like professional admiration. You really did make it easy, Margaret. So eager for a daughter-in-law to love, so quick to trust. I met her gaze, refusing to show how deeply her words cut. You played your part well, I conceded. But not well enough. A mistake, she acknowledged with a shrug. I got sloppy with the lunch containers. After 3 successful projects, I suppose I became overconfident. Projects? Benjamin echoed, disgust evident in his voice. Is that what you call murdering your husbands? Clara's expression hardened. Business ventures, she corrected. Investments of time and effort with significant financial returns. Nothing personal. You lived with us, I said, unable to contain my incredulity. You shared our home, our lives. You called me Mom. How could it not be personal? Acting, she replied simply. I've always been good at it. Ask my foster parents. Ask my college roommates. Ask any of the men I loved and left. A shadow crossed her face, so quickly I almost missed it. It's a skill you develop when you learn early that no one helps you unless they think you're something you're not. For the first time, I glimpsed something genuine beneath the calculated exterior. A flash of the damaged woman behind the murderous facade. Not enough to justify her actions, not even close, but enough to remind me that monsters are made, not born. Benjamin seemed to catch it too. Who were you? He asked softly. Before you became Clara? Before the other names? She stiffened, the vulnerability disappearing as quickly as it had emerged. No one of consequence. There must have been something real, Benjamin persisted. Something true about you, about us. You want to know if any of it was real? Clara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. If I ever actually cared? If there was one genuine moment in our entire marriage? Benjamin nodded and I held my breath. No. She delivered the word like a knife thrust. Not 1 second. Every smile, every kiss, every I love you, all calculated, all false. You meant nothing to me, Benjamin. Less than nothing. You were a bank account with a pulse. Nothing more. I watched my son absorb the blow, his face paling but his eyes remaining steady. He had expected this answer, had prepared himself for it. Still, hearing it spoken so coldly must have been devastating. Thank you for your honesty, he said finally, his voice remarkably composed. I needed to hear that. Clara frowned, clearly unsettled by his reaction. She had wanted to hurt him, to see him crumble. His calm acceptance denied her that satisfaction. That's it, she demanded. No tears, no recriminations. Aren't you going to tell me I'll rot in hell? No, Benjamin replied simply. I just wanted the truth. Now I have it. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. I rose with him, relieved that this painful encounter was ending. You won't win, you know, Clara called as we turned to leave. My lawyer has new evidence, character witnesses. I'll be out in 5 years, maybe less. Benjamin paused, looking back at her. It doesn't matter, he said quietly. You've already lost everything. Your freedom, your money, your next victim. And you'll never have what my mother and I have. And what's that? Clara scoffed. Someone who truly loves us, he answered. Someone who would die for us, not because of us. As we walked away, Clara called, after us, her voice rising with each step we took. You think you've seen the last of me? This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll be back. But her threats faded as the door closed behind us, cutting off her desperate cries. Outside, in the parking lot, Benjamin stopped and took a deep breath of the spring air. Are you okay? I asked, studying his face. He nodded slowly. Better than I expected. It's strange, but seeing her like that, angry, powerless, still trying to manipulate us, it helped. She's not this all-powerful figure from my nightmares anymore. She's just pathetic. She's still dangerous, I cautioned. If she ever gets out, she won't, Benjamin said with certainty. Not with the evidence they have. Not with the additional murders they're connecting her to now. He took my hand as we walked to the car. Besides, we'll be in Chicago. We'll be careful. We'll be together. As we drove away from the detention center, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the imposing building growing smaller behind us. Clara would remain there until her trial, and if justice prevailed, for decades afterward. The threat she posed was contained, if not entirely eliminated. Do you think she was, telling the truth? I asked after a while. That none of it was real? Benjamin was silent for a long moment, watching the Washington landmarks slide past the window. I don't know, he admitted finally, and I don't think it matters anymore. What matters is what happens next. Chicago, I said, testing the word, imagining our new beginning in a city untainted by betrayal. Chicago, he agreed, with a small smile. A fresh start. That evening, as we shared dinner at my apartment, the conversation turned to practical matters. The logistics of the move, the selling of properties, the winding down of my perfume business, the routine details of rebuilding lives that had been so thoroughly shattered. I've been thinking about what you said, Benjamin ventured as we cleared the dishes. About starting something new in Chicago. Oh? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Your perfumes were always successful because they told a story, created a feeling. He hesitated. What if we created a foundation? Something to help people who've experienced what we did, victims of deception, of betrayal by those they trusted most. The idea resonated deeply. Using our experience to help others, I mused. Turning something terrible into something meaningful. Exactly. His eyes lit up with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since before Clara's arrest. We could fund research into psychological manipulation, support groups for survivors, educational programs to help people recognize the warning signs. The Phoenix Foundation, I suggested. Rising from the ashes. Benjamin smiled, the expression reaching his eyes for perhaps the first time in months. I like that. As we continued planning, sketching out possibilities for this new venture, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. We were moving forward, not just geographically, but emotionally. We were reclaiming our narrative from Clara, transforming her attempt to destroy us into a catalyst for helping others. Later, as Benjamin's prepared to leave, he paused at the door. She was wrong, you know, he said quietly. About me being easy to manipulate because I believed in love. Of course she was, I agreed. No, that part was true. His expression grew thoughtful. I do believe in love. I always have. But she was wrong to think that makes me weak. It's what saved us in the end. The love between you and me. The real love. She couldn't understand or corrupt. I hugged him tightly, tears pricking at my eyes. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. So proud of the man you are, despite everything she did. As I watched him drive away, I thought about the journey ahead. Chicago, the Phoenix Foundation, a new chapter for both of us. Clara had tried to end our story. Instead, she had only given us a more powerful one to tell. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the trial, 3 months later. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens poised to record the conclusion of what the media had dubbed the Black Widow case. The prosecution had methodically built their case, presenting evidence not just of Clara's attempt to murder Benjamin and me, but of her successful poisoning of 3 previous husbands. Her real identity had finally been uncovered. Elise Donnelly, born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, abandoned to the foster care system at age 7. Her history before her first documented murder at 24 remained largely a mystery, with only fragments of a troubled childhood and adolescence marked by petty crimes and manipulative behavior. Benjamin and I sat in the front row, having already given our testimony weeks earlier. The experience had been grueling but cathartic, allowing us to tell our story in our own words, to reclaim the narrative that Clara had so carefully constructed. Now we waited for the verdict, the culmination of months of legal proceedings, of psychological evaluations, of evidence both forensic and circumstantial. Clara sat at the defense table, perfectly poised, in a conservative navy suit, her hair styled simply, her expression one of dignified concern. Another performance, another mask. But this time, we could see through it. The jury filed in, their faces solemn. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Hernandez. The courtroom fell silent as the judge unfolded the paper, read its contents, and nodded gravely. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied, standing. "On the count of attempted murder in the first degree of Benjamin Wallace, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Benjamin's hand tightened around mine. "On the count of attempted murder in the first degree of Margaret Wallace, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." The litany continued through each charge, each name: Robert Kincaid, Thomas Greaves, William Foster, men whose families sat behind us in the courtroom, who had waited years for justice, who had once been told their loved ones had died of natural causes. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Clara's composure never wavered, her expression remaining calm and faintly puzzled, as if she couldn't quite understand how this miscarriage of justice had occurred. But when Judge Hernandez announced the sentence, 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, a flicker of genuine emotion finally crossed her face. Not remorse or fear, but rage. Pure, undiluted fury at having been caught, at having her carefully constructed world dismantled. As the bailiffs approached to lead her away, she turned to look directly at Benjamin and me. The mask dropped completely, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. I shivered despite the warmth of the courtroom. But Benjamin squeezed my hand reassuringly, and I remembered what he had said at the detention center. Clara was just a person. Dangerous, yes. Evil, perhaps. But ultimately just a damaged human being who had chosen to damage others. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Benjamin stepped to the microphones that had been hastily assembled on the steps. "We won't be making any statements today," he said firmly. "We ask that you respect our privacy as we move forward from this ordeal." James Harrison, our attorney, guided us through the crowd to a waiting car. "It's really over," he said once we were inside, relief evident in his voice. "With the sentence she received, she'll never see the outside of a prison again." "Good," I said simply, watching the courthouse recede through the rear window. It was strange to think that this building, these steps, would be among our last memories. Of Washington. Our flight to Chicago departed the next morning, carrying us toward our new life. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner in Benjamin's nearly empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes and bare walls, the conversation turned reflective. "Do you think we'll ever understand why she did it?" Benjamin asked, swirling the wine in his glass. "Not just the money, but the cruelty of it. The patience it took to marry someone, to live with them for years, all while slowly killing them." I considered the question carefully. We had both spent countless hours in therapy trying to comprehend the incomprehensible, to make sense of Clara's actions. "I don't think we can understand it," I said finally. "Not really. We're not wired the same way she is." "No," he agreed. "And maybe that's a good thing." "A very good thing," I echoed, raising my glass in a small toast. Later, as we stood on his balcony overlooking the city that had been our home for so many years, Benjamin turned to me with an expression of quiet determination. "I've been thinking about what you said in the car after we visited Clara, about turning our experience into something meaningful." I nodded, remembering our discussion of the Phoenix Foundation. "I want to take it a step further," he continued. "I don't just want to help victims after the fact. I want to prevent people like Clara from succeeding in the first place." "How?" "Education, awareness, research into the psychology of predators like her. His eyes were alight with purpose. We could partner with law enforcement, with medical examiners, with domestic violence organizations, help them recognize the signs of slow poisoning, of financial exploitation. A legacy from our pain, I said softly. Exactly. He turned back to the view. The Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Clara thought she was destroying us. Instead, she gave us a mission. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect summer day for new beginnings. As our car approached Reagan National Airport, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation. Washington had been my home for decades, the backdrop to my marriage, to raising Benjamin, to building my business. Leaving felt like abandoning a part of myself. Yet Chicago beckoned with its promise of anonymity, of reinvention, of purpose. The Phoenix Foundation already existed as more than just an idea. We had filed the paperwork, secured initial funding, begun reaching out to potential partners and experts in the field. As we checked our luggage and made our way to the security line, I noticed Benjamin studying a young couple nearby, their faces alight with love as they said goodbye. A shadow crossed his expression. "Do you think you'll ever trust enough to love again?" I asked gently. He considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always characterized him, even as a child. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me is terrified." "That's understandable," I assured him. "But I do know one thing," he continued, his gaze meeting mine. "I'm not going to let what Clara did define my entire life. She took 3 years. She doesn't get the rest." As we boarded the plane, finding our seats in first class, a splurge we'd decided was warranted for this momentous journey, I thought about my son's words. Clara had infiltrated our lives, had poisoned not just Benjamin's body, but our sense of security, our ability to trust. The damage she'd done was real and lasting, but she hadn't destroyed us. She hadn't stolen our capacity. For joy, for purpose, for love. As the plane lifted off, Washington growing smaller beneath us, I felt not just the physical distance increasing, but an emotional separation as well. We were leaving Clara behind, her influence, her shadow, her power over our lives. "To Chicago," Benjamin said, raising his complimentary champagne as the plane leveled off above the clouds. "To new beginnings," I added, clinking my glass against his. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I stood at the podium in the ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, surveying the crowd gathered for the official launch of the Phoenix Foundation. Law enforcement officials, medical professionals, survivors of domestic abuse and fraud, representatives from partner organizations, all united by their commitment to identifying and stopping predators like Clara. Benjamin stood to my right, handsome in a charcoal suit, his confidence growing with each passing month. Sarah Lynn, the accountant from Washington who had given him that second date, sat in the front row, her encouraging smile a beacon of warmth. Their relationship was progressing slowly, cautiously, with the careful deliberation of two people who understood the value of truth and trust. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion welling within me. The Phoenix Foundation was born from a personal tragedy that many of you are familiar with from news reports. My son and I were targeted by a woman who had already killed 3 men using similar methods. We were fortunate. A series of coincidences and the quick thinking of a colleague saved our lives. I paused, scanning the attentive faces before me. But we recognized that our story could have ended very differently. And for Robert Kincaid, Thomas Greaves, and William Foster, it did. Their families never received the warning we did. They never had the chance to fight back. Benjamin stepped forward to join me at the podium. "The Phoenix Foundation exists to change that," he continued smoothly, "to educate healthcare providers about recognizing the signs of gradual poisoning, to help law enforcement connect seemingly natural deaths that follow a pattern, to support survivors as they rebuild their lives and their capacity to trust." As he outlined the Foundation's initiatives, I studied my son with a mother's loving eye, noting the subtle changes the past year had wrought. The shadows under his eyes had faded. His shoulders no longer carried the weight of betrayal quite so heavily. The wariness in his gaze had softened, though it would likely never disappear completely. We had both been transformed by our experience, made more cautious, perhaps, but also more compassionate, more determined, more aware of the precious fragility of the bonds we shared. When the formal presentation concluded and the networking portion of the event began, I found myself approached by a woman in her 60s, her face lined with grief, but her eyes clear and determined. "Mrs. Wallace," she said, taking my hand. "I'm Janet Foster. William was my brother." I recognized the name immediately. Clara's third victim. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said, sincerely. For years, I knew something wasn't right about Sarah. That's what she called herself then. Janet's grip tightened. "I told the police. I told the medical examiner. No one believed me. They said I was a jealous sister, that I resented his new wife." I nodded, understanding all too well how convincing Clara could be, how easily she deflected suspicion. "It wasn't your fault," I assured her. She was very good at what she did. "What you're doing here." Janet gestured to the room, to the foundation banners, to the informational materials. "It matters. It might have saved William. It will save others." As we continued talking, sharing stories of the loved ones Clara had taken from us, her successfully, me nearly, I felt a curious sense of communion. Janet Foster was not just a victim's family member. She was a fellow survivor of Clara's manipulation, of the gaslighting and isolation that accompanied her deadly schemes. Later, as the event wound down, Benjamin found me by the windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Success, I think," he said, loosening his tie slightly. "3 police departments want our training program. 2 hospitals are interested in the screening protocol. And more importantly," I added, "we've created a community. Did you see how people were connecting, sharing resources, supporting each other?" He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "From the ashes," he murmured. "Phoenix rising," I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the water with streaks of gold and crimson. Chicago had welcomed us, had offered the fresh start we'd sought. My small perfume studio near our adjoining apartments was flourishing with a new line inspired by healing and transformation. Benjamin's position at the financial firm provided the stability we needed while the foundation grew. And most importantly, we had each other. Our bond strengthened by the crucible we'd survived together. Clara's appeal was denied, Benjamin said after a while. "James called this morning." I exhaled slowly, releasing a tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "Good. That's good." He said she became enraged when the judge announced the decision. Had to be restrained. I could picture it all too easily, Clara's mask of dignified innocence cracking to reveal the fury beneath. "She'll never stop trying," I said. "Never stop believing she can manipulate her way out." "Probably not," Benjamin agreed. "But it doesn't matter anymore. She can't reach us here. She can't hurt anyone else." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, Sarah approached, her smile warm as she joined us. "Ready for dinner? The reservation's at 8. Benjamin nodded, his expression softening as he looked at her. It wasn't the blind adoration he'd once shown Clara, but something steadier, more grounded. A beginning, not an ending. "Mom?" he asked. "Coming?" "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, linking my arm through his as we walked toward the exit. Outside, Chicago bustled around us, vibrant and anonymous. No reporters recognized us here. No neighbors whispered as we passed. We were just a family going to dinner. A mother, her son, his new friend, ordinary in our happiness, extraordinary in our journey. The lunchbox that had trembled in my hands that day seemed a lifetime ago. The crystal-rimmed container, David's urgent warning, Benjamin's pale face in the hospital, all had faded into memory, painful but no longer paralyzing. Clara had tried to end our story with poison and lies. Instead, she had only given it a more powerful middle chapter. As we stepped into the warm Chicago evening, I thought of what Benjamin had said on that courthouse balcony in Washington. "Clara doesn't get the rest of our lives." He was right. The rest, the healing, the rebuilding, the loving again, that belonged to us alone. Greed can blind a heart, but love will always unmask the truth. Family is not built on blood or marriage alone. It's built on loyalty, sacrifice, and trust.